For my son's birthday, my wife and I organized a small backyard party. We invited the whole family, as we always did for our children's birthdays, and also let him invite all his friends. We live in a rural area, so our backyard borders the forest on two sides. Since we have a large property, we were able to spread several tables across the grass with food and drinks. The party lasted into the evening. Most of the guests had already left, but close relatives and a few friends stayed later. It was around 8 p.m. and the mosquitoes were relentless, so I decided to run to the shed at the back of the yard, near the forest, to grab some torches. I took 6 and placed them on the grass before going back to get the fuel. However, while I was in the shed, I heard footsteps in the forest. I stopped what I was doing to look outside, but it was too dark to see anything. After grabbing the fuel, I returned to the others and planted the torches in the ground. They gave off a decent amount of light and helped keep the bugs away. There were about 6 kids still playing, including my son, and they all wanted to play hide and seek in the forest. My wife and I allowed it, making sure they stayed close to the tree line. For a while, we could hear the kids laughing and shouting not too far into the woods while we chatted with our relatives. About 15 minutes later, the playful screams changed. They became louder, more desperate. We looked at each other and stood up, worried. One by one, the kids came running out of the forest, terrified, saying there was something in there. We don't have bears or large predators around here, so that wasn't our first assumption. I told all the kids to stay near the patio, and my brother Daniel and I, being the strongest ones there, decided to check it out. We grabbed a couple of flashlights and stepped into the darkness. At first, we only heard the usual nighttime sounds, crickets, wind rustling through the trees. But as we moved forward, something began to stand out. At first, it sounded like an animal, but as we got closer, the sound became more human. We stopped at the same time, that uneasy feeling of being watched creeping over us. I signaled for Daniel to stop, and we stood in silence. The best way to describe the sound we heard next was an angry moan. It sounded human, but in a strange, unsettling way. Then we heard the leaves rustling on the ground in front of us. We pointed our flashlights, and there it was, something or someone behind a tree. The moaning stopped. Daniel took a step forward and called out. What happened next was straight out of a horror movie. A scream. A scream so loud, so piercing, so inhuman that it seemed to fill the air around us. I'm sure it could have been heard for miles. Daniel turned and bolted. We waved for everyone to get inside the house. Once we were back, Tom called the police. They said it was probably some wild animal. We wanted to insist that it was human, but honestly, we weren't even sure anymore. To this day, we have no idea what we saw or heard in that forest. But we do know one thing, whatever it was, it didn't want us there. I no longer work night shifts, but for many years I worked overnight at a residential nursing home. On weekends, I was the only person responsible for a ward dedicated to dementia patients. Sometimes, the environment was eerie. 15 residents under my care, and only me to monitor everything throughout the night. Around 3 a.m., after doing my rounds to ensure everyone was safe and well, I heard the doorbell ring. A chill ran down my spine. This was a secure facility, and no one should have been ringing the bell in the middle of the night. I went to the window to check, but there was no one there. I attributed it to exhaustion, thinking it might have been an auditory hallucination. 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. I went to check the window, and once again, there was no one there. However, I noticed a strange car parked across the street. Just in case, I took a picture of the vehicle and returned to my station, where I was playing cards with a lovely elderly lady, despite her advanced dementia. As I sat down, she looked at me and asked, "What did the night want?" A shiver ran down my spine, but I tried to ignore it, knowing that hallucinations were common in dementia patients. This lady, in particular, often confused time and space. Less than 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. Now I was truly frightened. Another resident was awake, walking down the hallway and pretending to paint with a clean brush, just to keep himself busy. As he passed me on his way to the window, he calmly said, "Don't open the door alone. He might hurt you." He continued pretending to paint while my heart pounded. I looked out the window and saw the same car from before. Suddenly, I noticed a shadow moving near the entrance. A man stepped out from the corner, and as he looked toward the window beside me, our eyes met. The shock was so intense that I screamed. My residents began to stir, and the man outside ran off. I called the police, who arrived quickly. The situation turned into complete chaos. 15 residents awakened by the commotion, and 2 officers trying to control the situation. With their help, I managed to calm everyone down, but it took a while. Later, the officers told me that a house on the same street had been broken into that night. A woman had been attacked in her bed by someone who ransacked the house looking for drugs. I can't help but wonder if the same individual was trying to break into my unit to steal the medications stored there. I'm grateful the facility was so well secured. It seems the intruder chose the next easiest target. But what I could never understand was how 2 of my patients knew someone was outside with bad intentions. They weren't anywhere near the door to see through the window. I feel like I lived through one of those unexplainable moments, as if I had been given warnings from guardian angels, or maybe just a strange coincidence. Not long after, I resigned. Management refused to hire a second staff member for the night shift, even though it was clearly below the recommended standards for proper care. I graduated from college about 2 years before this happened, so it must have been in 2015. My best friend at the time was Alan. He was always the adventurous type, ready for a hike or a spontaneous trip. After graduation, he moved to a tourist town in the mountains and got a job at a tourism company. It wasn't exactly what he studied for in engineering school, but it was his choice. Part of me envied him while I was stuck in my cubicle in the city. In the summer, I took my vacation to visit him. Since Alan loved outdoor activities, he planned a 4-day camping trip to a secret spot known only to locals and experienced hikers. As soon as I arrived at his house, we talked for a bit and went to bed early to leave the next day. We loaded the car with our gear: 2 large backpacks, a 3-person tent, a camping stove, some utensils, and the camera Alan used to post random videos on YouTube. The rest was food, water, and clothes. Since it was summer, we planned to sleep on the ground to save space. Alan drove while I followed the GPS on his phone. The road was winding and barely used, full of fallen branches and logs. It felt like there were obstacles preventing our arrival from the very start. I mentioned this to Alan, who just laughed. Suddenly, he stopped the car at a random spot and turned off the engine. "This is it," he said. I didn't see any trail, but I didn't question him. We grabbed our things and started hiking around 3 p.m., still with plenty of daylight. The first night was peaceful. We set up camp and made a fire. The next day, we packed everything up and followed the trail again. It was already late when we found a new place to sleep. The darkness made it difficult to set up the tent, but we managed to light another fire while Alan filmed me with his camera. We stayed up until around midnight, until the embers began to die out. I fell asleep, but woke up around 2 a.m. with the urge to go to the bathroom. I carefully unzipped the tent so I wouldn't wake Alan and walked a short distance away. It was incredibly dark, with only the faint glow of the moon guiding me. That's when I noticed a distant light swaying back and forth, like a lantern. I frowned. Who would be out here in the middle of the night? I stood still for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Shortly after, I heard whispers. I couldn't make out the words, but it was clearly 2 or more people. The strangest part was that they were heading straight for our campsite. I thought about waking Alan, but didn't want to draw attention. The whispering grew louder, and now the light illuminated part of our tent. I saw the silhouettes of 2 figures moving cautiously, almost stealthily. My heart pounded. My friend was inside the tent, and I had no idea what these strangers' intentions were. Without thinking, I picked up a rock and threw it in their direction. The figures quickly turned toward the noise, and to my surprise, they ran off into the forest. I waited a while before returning to the tent, and when I told Alan what had happened, he didn't believe me. I swore it was true, but he just said I was probably hallucinating. If his goal was to calm me down, it didn't work. I stayed awake the rest of the night. In the morning, I brought it up again. Alan downplayed the incident, saying they were probably just other campers, but his expression changed when he realized that his camera, which had been inside his backpack, was gone. He was furious, and at that moment, he finally believed me. By 3 p.m., we returned to the spot where we had spent the previous night. We planned to stay one more night before leaving the next day. We lit the fire and talked until around 8 p.m. when Alan went to the bathroom. He was taking too long. When he returned, he was out of breath, his face filled with pure terror. "We need to leave now," he said, panting. I asked what had happened, but he only insisted that we pack up and leave as fast as possible. We walked for almost 2 hours in the dark until we found a place where Alan felt safe. On the way, he had briefly told me what he saw, but it was only when we stopped and drank some water that he explained properly. He said that while he was looking for a good place to relieve himself, he spotted a faint light in the distance. Thinking it was the same thing from the night before, he decided to get closer to investigate. When he got close enough, he froze. He saw 6 people, 5 men and 1 woman, lying on a large blanket. They were all naked, but that wasn't what traumatized him. In the center of the blanket, there was something small, a newborn, motionless, lifeless. Everyone was covered in what seemed to be blood. Alan didn't stay to see more. He quietly backed away and ran to warn me. When he arrived at the campsite, the panic in his eyes said everything. I don't know how much of it was true, but the fear on his face convinced me. I had already seen those people in the forest. His camera disappeared without explanation, and now this. I spent another sleepless night. As soon as the sun rose, we left. When we got back to town, we went straight to the police station to report what had happened. The officer who attended us seemed skeptical, but noted the location and our phone numbers. He said they would investigate and contact us if there were any updates. Days later, we received no call. Alan decided to go back to the police station. The same officer attended him and said they had gone to the site but found nothing, just a camera with some silly footage. It was Alan's camera, exactly as he had left it. After that, we went on with our lives. We grew apart, and I never went back to his house. To this day, I wonder if I should call him to see how he's doing. That event never left my mind.